Welcome back to Baithak. This is your host, Aryan Mokhtan. Today we will be discussing the landslides that took place recently and also about the Indian Gorkhas in the northeast region. In cover today, I wanted to discuss about the landslides that were taking place recently in the Darjeeling area. There was a lot of them that took place. One of them was above the tuck shop of Loreto Convent School, which was quite devastating. It trapped a car and a few people were injured as well. There were more which happened near the Darjeeling railway station, which on the road that goes up to RKSP. There was also one more that took place in the Rohini Road, which trapped and closed down the Rohini Road for quite some time. And there was also a few ones that went and that took place in the third mile to 6 mile road. Now, this is quite a common occurrence in the Darjeeling area. Landslides have always been a common occurrence, but it's important to note the exact reasons why the landslides take place. And I just wanted to delve a little bit into depth about that. Now, there was an article that I was going through. It's known as Landslides and Floods in the Teesta Basin, Darjeeling and Jalpaiguri areas by Raghunath Pal, which I'll be linking down to below if you want to read the entire article. But it really goes into depth about why exactly landslides take place. Now, the primary reasons why is because Darjeeling is actually a very prone area for landslides. Previously, we were discussing about how the Teesta Basin is a very prime location for flooding. This also goes in depth and kind of in hand with the flooding because landslides and floods actually go kind of hand in hand. The plain areas face and the basin areas face floods while the hilly regions and the more mountainous regions face landslides. Now, the reason for this is because of course, the more or less the same reasons as the plains and the floodings. It's torrential rainfall, the fragile geology of the area, as well as deforestation and other man-made causes. Now, when we look at torrential rainfall, we had actually quite gone in depth about it during our floods episode, and it basically describes how rapid flash floods take place due to rapid flash rainfall. Now, the rainfall actually causes a lot of these rivers and these small tributaries, what we also call as joras, to swell up in volume. And this causes a lot of erosion to take place in the areas, and which also consequently results in landslides happening in more of the hilly areas. Now, the geological factors are also very important because we need to consider exactly what the Himalayas are. The Himalayan region is actually more of a sedimentary rock base, and it was actually underground and under the sea even at one point of time. When the Indian subcontinent clashed with the Asian continent, it actually rose this entire area which was under the sea up into what we call now the Himalayas. Now, this caused a lot of the regions, rocks, and a lot of the regions areas to get crumpled up and crushed up in very awkward positions. And we need to also consider that the Himalayas are one of the most newest and youngest mountain ranges. So a lot of it is still unstable, a lot of it is still undergoing processes. That's the reason why it's very loose. And the types of rocks are also very prone to water erosion. This causes the massive rainfalls to actually have a very large impact during landslides and landslide seasons. Now, couple this with the deforestation that has been taking place and the man-made impact on the area, then of course that's a recipe for disaster, and landslides take place in quite a rapid fashion. Now, normally what happens is, since the tree roots actually take a hold of the land and kind of keep it in place, it actually quite prevents landslides to a large extent. But when you deforestate an area, that causes the tree cover and the tree holding to go out, and this causes landslides to take place. Now, couple that with a lot of construction in Darjeeling happens in what is known as a cut and hold basis. So basically what happens is there is a hilly area, you cut a portion of it, you hold that position, and then you make a construction here. Now, during this, what happens is that a lot of the pressure which was being previously taken by a large rock or a large mass of land gets cancelled out, and then we create a false wall so that we can hold that pressure in. Now, this does not usually take place in the best possible fashion, and a lot of contractors actually do a lot of cost cutting in these areas, which causes these structures to be built in a very low fashion. This couple along with a lot of the pressure has already been built up, and then you build massive structures on this area as well. This creates a lot of pressure, and this obviously creates landslides during the rainfall season. Now, along with this, we've also noticed a very weird trend that is happening, that a lot of the landslides, like the one in Tuckshop, the one that happened near the Darjeeling railway station, and the ones that were happening in the highways, normally take place near roads and normally take place during in and around the highways. Now, the reason for this is because the highway constructions also follow this procedure. They cut the land, but a lot of the times the highway procedures and the highway construction areas actually forego creating these barriers and forego creating these walls which actually hold up the land and secure the places. Now, this along with coupling along with the massive flooding that has already been taking place, the poor drainage systems that have been causing a lot of water accumulation, is just a recipe for disaster. So, of course, when we look at it from a basis, the natural phenomenon and the natural areas and the natural geology of the place really put us at a disadvantage that we are a landslide prone area. But there is a lot that could be done from our end as well. If we follow proper construction methods, if we follow proper afforestation methods, also improve drainage systems and proper utilization of resources, we can really limit the destruction that happens with landslides and really limit landslides altogether. In the main part of our discussion, I actually wanted to delve further into exactly what the Indian Gorkhas are up to in the Northeast area and a little bit of the history as well. Because when we think about it, and when we look at the literature that is present, and when we look at a lot of discussions that take place around Indian Gorkhas, it is mostly concentrated to the Darjeeling area, and a little bit of spillage takes place towards the Sikkim. But most of the research, most of the discussions, and most of the stories that take place are mostly focused on the Gorkhaland and Darjeeling areas. But we need to understand that there is a very prolific history of Indian Gorkhas in the Northeast region as well. And there's a lot of issues, and this obviously demands a lot of discussion and debate as well. So I just wanted to shed light into this topic as well. Now, when we look at it from a historical standpoint, Nepal and Assam have always have a very good relationship. It is even true that during the Kamrup dynasty of Assam, there was a lot of intermingling of people, and even Kamrup prince had married one of the princesses of the Nepal kingdom. So there has always been a connection towards Assam, particularly from Nepal. And during this time period, there was a lot of people who migrated towards Assam and actually settled down and during these kingdoms. But the actual main migration took place during what is known as the Katak Legion. Now, the Katak Legion was actually a wing of the British Army, which later which actually formed into the Assam Infantry, which is now today under the Indian Army known as the Assam Rifles. Now, this Katak Legion, which actually got deployed into the Northeast region, was mostly made up of Indian Gorkhas and mostly made up of Gorkha Regiment soldiers. And once they started traveling into these areas, and when they would be dismissed from service, they started settling down in these Northeast regions. Now, coupled with that, the Border Roads Organization of the East India Company and later on the British Legions found it very useful to use Nepalese labor in constructing rails and roadways in the Northeast region. And this also brought a lot of migration of Nepalis and Indian Gorkhas into these Northeast regions. Now, couple that along with the normal immigration that normally takes place from when a kingdom falls down, when economic rises and lows take place, there's always a lot of migration that takes place. So there has been a lot of movement of Nepalis into these areas. But we need to understand exactly how the two communities have been interacting with each other. When we look at it today, most of the Indian Gorkhas are quite widespread all over the Northeast region. And it is quite unique that Indian Gorkhas are one of the few communities which are found all over the Northeast region, because mostly you will find that particular tribes inhabit particular areas of the Northeast, but Indian Gorkhas are one of the only tribes and communities which are actually found all over the Northeast region. Now, this has placed us in a very unique position because we are at ire with, and we are always at standoffs with every single tribe, and we don't really have a particular region to identify with. That causes a lack of identity along with a lot of tension that takes place as well. Now, what we need to understand is that the Northeast region's tribes and people are quite proud and quite self-sufficient and very self-bordering to a certain way. So immigration into these areas has always been a big problem for them. That coupled along with them being in a very frontier zone, bordered by China on top, Burma on the right, and of course the Indian legions and Indian countries and kingdoms on the left, that coupled along with them being very secluded in nature and them being very proud of their heritage and culture. So they really want to protect that, and they really want to protect their autonomy along with their identity and culture. So they've always been very unwelcoming of outsiders entering their areas. So immigration has always been a big problem. But their unique location causes a lot of immigration to take place into this area. Now, the main focus of this anti-immigration hate has been towards the Bangladeshis, which have been moving from Bangladesh into these northeast areas and actually causing a lot of issues with the local tribes and authorities. I remember particularly during the Assam tensions that most of the Assamese tribes were actually forced out into the hilly regions, with most of the plains being taken over by the Bangladeshis, and that has already caused a lot of strife with immigrants. Now, this has actually led to a negative consequence, and we as the Indian Gorkhas are actually collateral damage of this hate. Now, Indian Gorkhas are usually treated as immigrants. They are not liked at all by the locals. They are highly disliked, and they are kind of taken at par with Bangladeshis and with foreigners, and basically as immigrants. Now, this has caused a lot of issue, and it has caused a lot of identity crisis as well, because most of the people who are traveling towards these areas, the Indian Gorkhas, which are actually immigrating towards these areas, actually come from more of the peasant class or the military class. Now, the military class people are naturally more dominant, and we'll actually move into the reasons for why they hate the military class a little bit later. But when you look at the peasant class, they mostly don't take their documentations very seriously, and they don't take their files very seriously, and they don't really care much about having to pay large sums of money to acquire these useless pieces of paper. So they actually just move into these areas, start settling the areas, and then they don't really have a documentation handy to prove that they have. And even when they do, since they're already looked at as immigrants, it causes a lot of issues and a lot of strife as well. Now, when we look at the peasant class, there's also an issue of success. Now, human beings naturally avert success. We actually have a disgust towards success, especially when it comes from a different community and especially when it comes from a competition. Now, the hill tribes of the Northeast region have mostly been following cut and slash and burn and slash methods for agriculture. But we, as the Indian Gorkhas, having mostly been attributed and mostly been acclimatized to doing agriculture in the hilly regions, we actually have a lot of techniques at hand, and we actually know a lot about agriculture in the hills. But mostly the tribes of Northeast regions were actually more used to the plains and more used to doing agriculture in the plains. It's just that due to immigration, they were actually forced towards the hilly regions, and the methods that they were using for agriculture was good, but not as good as the ones that the Indian Gorkhas were capable of. Now, Indian Gorkhas came in, introduced new methods such as terrace farming, such as rotational crop formations, and so the Indian Gorkha farmers actually became a much more successful than the locals, and that caused a lot of ire and that caused a lot of tension between the two communities as well. Now, another important factor we must consider is that most of the military that has been deployed into the Northeast region has been the Gorkha regiments, and Assam Rifles and the Gorkha regiment are mostly made up of Indian Gorkhas. This has caused a lot of strife because, as we know, the Northeast region is very politically unstable and militarily unstable as well. There have been numerous insurgent movements as well as separatist movements that have taken place in these areas, and most of them have been quashed by the Indian Gorkhas. So we are naturally looked at as the enemy. We are naturally looked as the people who are trying to subdue their ideas and trying to subdue their authorities. Now, although it is the Indian government who is trying to subdue these authorities and ideas, we are the face of that movement and we are the face of quashing those rebellions. And that has caused a lot of friction towards the Indian Gorkhas. Now, Indian Gorkha regiments, which are actually deployed in the Northeast region, naturally and obviously tend to favor the Nepalis and the Indian Gorkhas which are living in these areas. And so they naturally and obviously have a bias towards certain people of their own communities. This has also caused a lot of friction because an Indian Gorkha will not treat a Khasi or a northeastern tribe the same way he would do his own countrymen, and this causes the northeast people to look at us with a very negative ire. Now this in later on stages has caused a lot of strife. It has even caused culling. It has even resulted in genocide of Indian Gorkhas in the northeast region, and we will delve deeper into this. But I really wanted to point out that, and just to take a step back, that a large portion of these discussions don't really take place, and a large portion of all the facts that I just put forward rarely come up in discussion. Most of the discussion and debate that takes place around Gorkhas is about the Gorkhaland movement, and rightly so, because that has been the focus and the centrum, more or less, of the Indian Gorkhas. But we really need to consider the plight and the struggles of the Indian Gorkhas in the Northeast area as well, because they too more or less face the same issues that we do. The whole point of creating a Gorkhaland state was so that we have something to identify with. And there's always been a issue, as we had discussed in previous episodes, about being identified with Nepal and in relation or in autonomy with being identified as an Indian Gorkha. Now, the Indian Gorkhas of the Northeast region are facing that to a certain level. I would even argue to a higher level, because with immigration being such an important issue in Northeast India, if we could identify Indian Gorkhas as a valid Indian part and parcel of the community, then that would quash and quell a lot of the issues that we have been facing. Now, we would be continuing deeper into this. I feel like we need a lot more time. So we will be discussing this in the next episode. But I thank you so much for listening. In the comment section today, I really wanted to discuss this comment left by one of my sisters, Nora. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the kind words. And I think you bring up a very interesting point, that the textbooks and literature that we read during our school time is mostly focused on the Nepal's Nepali, and it becomes very difficult to identify with that. Now, I remember in my school days as well, and I think a lot of people can agree with this, that the Nepali that we speak and the language that we speak on a regular day-to-day basis with our family and friends is completely different and very different from the Nepali that we have to learn and actually study. And most of the stories and most of the textbooks and most of the literature that is focused around our language also tends to falter and try to more align itself with the Nepali that is spoken in Nepal. That causes a lot of alienation with the language itself. That causes a lot of a disconnect, and that actually leads to, and I believe is a very important factor which has led to the separation of the current generation with its culture and identity. Because most of the time, literature and stories actually play a very important role in connecting yourself with the community and connecting yourself with your traditions and culture. But since you find such a disconnect in the language itself, you can't really understand the essence of the stories and essence of the literature that you're reading, because the language itself is in such a different method and is written in such a different way that you actually start creating a very strong disconnect, like as if this is a completely separate thing and I am completely a separate thing. The language that I speak is separate and the language that I'm being told to study is very separate. And this separatist culture, I think, is one of the most important reasons why the generations today have a very big disconnect. Now, I would like to further uh, explore this topic, but I thank you so much for bringing this up. That would be it for the episode today. I thank you all for watching and listening again. Until the next episode. Godspeed.